We need to unite and work together if we're all going to get through this.
Sounds like socialism to me.
The amount of people I see talking about socialism positively is actually staggering.
Do you think, do you really think that a proletarian revolution is just around the corner in America?
Grab your pitchforks and stab your mayor.
Your hero, Obama.
He's not my hero.
How heroic he comes
idiot. If Bernie Sanders were president, right, and he wanted to bring the same ideas as for socialism into this country, do you think that we would benefit?
Yeah.
But I just told you Venezuela's eating rats.
But I just want people to have health care. I don't want,
Same thing Hugo Chavez said.
Oh my god. You people have, worms in your brain, honestly.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of The Sensible Socialist, a podcast for the rational left. I'm your host, Kevin Gustafson.
We are in a rigged system, and a big part of the rigging are these dishonest people in the media.
I've been dealing with the press a long time. I think the political press is among the most dishonest people that I've ever met.
People don't trust you, and the people don't trust the media.
She starts asking me all sorts of ridiculous questions, and, you could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever.
I have the right to ask the question.
No, you don't.
This is the question.
You haven't been called.
No, I have the right to ask the question.
Go back to your
position. No.
And he stood up and started ranting and raving like a madman. He was totally, absolutely out of line.
The mainstream media, these people back here, they're the worst. They are so dishonest, absolute scum. Remember that, scum.
Let me tell you about the Wall Street Journal. I have no respect whatsoever for the Wall Street Journal. I don't think they know what they're doing. They have taken me on so much. It's so ridiculous. Every day editorials, bad editorials. I don't even want to read it very much anymore. They're so wrong. We're going to open up those libel laws so that when the New York Times writes a hit piece, which is a total disgrace, or when the Washington Post, which is there for other reasons, writes a hit piece, we can sue them and win money. By the way, the world's most dishonest people are back there. Look at all the cameras going. Look at all those cameras. Unbelievable. They are dishonest. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them. I'm not looking for credit. But what I don't want is when I raise millions of dollars, have people say, like this sleazy guy right over here from ABC. He's a sleaze in my book. You're a sleaze because you know the facts, and you know the facts well. It was very unfair that the press treated us so bad.
All right, on this week's episode, I'm going to be talking with Reece Baker. Rhys is an independent left-wing journalist who has been covering a lot of the events that are going on in the DC area and other places in recent period. So thought I'd talk to him about kind of some of what you've just heard, the idea that the enemy of the people and the role of the media and all of those kinds of issues. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Reece Baker. All right, so I'm here with Reece Baker, and we're going to be talking about, I guess, journalism generally and the role of particularly independent left journalists. And what I want to kind of do, I tried to start the rest of these by talking about what's happened in the last week in the news. And usually that's just me giving my commentary, but since you're a news person, I do want to talk to you about a few of those things. But before we do that, why don't you introduce yourself and give a bit of a background about, who you are, where you come from. And then one thing I've asked kind of everybody too is why they came to the position they came. So how you describe yourself politically and why you kind of would describe yourself that way.
So hi, yeah, I am I call myself kind of an amateur independent journalist. The reason I think that journalism is important for the left right now is because I think it's become more widely accepted to call out the mainstream media as being a tool of, you know, the ruling class, whatever we're going to call them. They don't want us to have the information that we can use to improve our lives in the world. They want us to have the information that drives us toward activities that make sense to them for profit. And so Noam Chomsky is like the real person to look to in the past for critiquing the mainstream media with manufacturing consent. But I think that there's a new thing coming up as well with using the media as a radical tool to support socialist ends. And it kind of copies like this dirty world of Breitbart. And so there's a big interesting conversation to have around journalism for the left right now and as an industry to develop into the future.
All right. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was going to ask you, you know, I guess sort of what you thought about Chomsky's critique in the manufacturing consent, and you've already kind of given me a preview of that. But one of the questions would you call yourself a socialist?
Absolutely.
All right.
I'm a socialist I call myself an anarcho-communist in deep conversation about political ideology. I think that socialism is the next step, and I think that's a popular idea to hold, really. And I think it's quite intuitive based on a reading of history with critical reasoning.
Was there you know, there's some people who were raised in red diapers, they say, and there's some people who, you know, there's some kind of event or some, you know, and I've kind of described a little bit about how I did it. Was there like a moment in your life where you went from being like a hardcore right winger to moving to the left, or have you kind of always felt that way?
I have always wanted to be good. And it was a religious thing when I was younger.
Sure.
And I didn't swear. I like to help people. It's gratifying. But I would say there was definitely a whole period of my life where I was extremely ignorant and I hate to say it, but a little racist. Not in the way that I would even really hold hate, but it was racist opinions. It was racist. It was believing in race and
like bigotry.
Yeah. But I also, so I came to leftism a bit before I was able to really get rid of any of that, of all of that.
Okay.
And because I came to leftism when I read Hidden Agendas, which is a book by a great journalist called John Pilger. And it's him taking apart the history of American imperialism with stories from Cambodia and Vietnam and like Myanmar, as everything was being set up to give us cheap labor here in the West. And so the CIA was getting themselves involved with these dictators who were killing people, and it made me furious.
Yeah.
And I didn't really look too much further for a long time. This was about 14, and it was quite overwhelming. But that would be when I decided that I was part of humanity rather than part of like a nation, because I was so disgusted and I didn't understand the power dynamics really. The ends don't justify the means.
Did you grow up in like a religious household? Is that where that sort of original religious feeling comes? You know, there's a lot of I don't know if I call them good communists, but communists who come from Catholic backgrounds, because there's this sort of kind of tendency to, you know, just use the dogmatic kind of thinking, and I can just like, I don't like the God thing, so I'll just like. So was it? Did you come from a Catholic background? Was it?
No, but I would love to give a shout out to Catholic Workers of America because I mean, the Catholic workers are behind some really great direct action.
Yeah.
No, I did grow up in a Baptist church in England, and it was, the preacher was reasonably conservative, but I didn't understand that. He wouldn't marry a couple at one point because they were, they'd been cohabitating, and but everybody got mad and he got fired. So I think I was in a pretty progressive community anyway. But then I kind of dropped church when I started playing soccer, and I think I might have done that on purpose, because I was in Sunday school. I was often like in trouble. Yes, the one who's asking the questions.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that. So I mean, I was definitely that kid too. So not Church of England in England, huh? That's the first churches I went to were Church of England. Yeah. Okay.
But I don't remember those days at all. So I dressed in those white gowns.
Sure.
And I did choir boy stuff, minus like the dirty jokes I could make. But then the Baptists are far less about that. The Church of England I went to was a big stone building. It was beautiful. And then the other one I went to was the Baptist church, was this modern like glass and regular building.
It's amazing, you know, in the States, you don't often, I mean, maybe it's somewhat of ignorance on my part, but I don't think so, that the Baptist church is not necessarily the most progressive. And it does sound like, at least in the case of like there being the controversy in that I mean, maybe it is because of the I don't remember who said it, but the great mediocrity of our mother church, the Anglican church being very, no one really gives a shit, you know, like people are religious in England, but they're not really, because no one really cares. But the sort of Baptist being a progressive force is interesting. Not necessarily that they were a progressive force all the time, but at least in this case.
Yeah, it's just in this case. It's harder to be as openly bigoted, I think, as a British church, because England just has... Okay, I say that. I don't know anything about a lot of communities in England. Yeah. I'm talking about the village I'm from. I think it's harder to express like racism behind the pulpit in England than it is here in communities where, you know, the church is attended by families who have attended it for 200 years.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and backcountry kind of places.
Right. Where, you kind of know, there's a wink and a nod where you know what's going on. When did you come to the States?
2003. I was 16 years old.
16.
Yeah, so I moved from just outside of London to North Carolina, Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Interesting.
And
why?
Because my father wanted to move home to his roots, and Chapel Hill turned out to be a good area because they have a lot of tech companies, which is the industry he was in.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then Chapel Hill is a good school.
Gotcha. All right.
Or the high school.
All right.
And then I went to UNC Asheville, which a lot of people have heard of Asheville because it's a lot of fun. Especially a lot of people in the left. I had a lot of fun in college. I did. I've got to say.
I understand. I mean, I do too. I do realize I probably could have done more in college, but I still look fondly upon my time. Like I said, I do try to talk about the news, and this week, you know, if you look at social media or something like that, there's been a lot of exasperation about this particular week. The big three, I think, events are obviously the election in Brazil. You have the result of Bolsonaro. Yeah. He basically somebody who lauds the former military junta, who has made, I know at least the people from Argentina that I've spoken to or read about are fairly worried about what the potential result of this is. The business magazines are talking about how it's a great potential time to invest in Brazil. And obviously this comes on the heels of the interesting corruption scandal that, you know, brought down Lula da Silva and really hurt the Workers' Party, and in some ways brought out the contradictions within that whole thing. What do you think about this election in Brazil?
It's terrifying. I think I've gotten most of my analysis of it from Glenn Greenwald, because he's on the ground and he's been talking about this for a while. He's even covered the polling, which pretty much said that Bolsonaro was going to get elected, and that there's like a upswelling of fascism in Brazil specifically, and that hate crimes were increasing. That his supporters were already assaulting, and I don't want to say killing, because I'm not certain that I heard of anybody get killed, but I don't follow Brazilian news that directly, and it's obviously a trend story as well, where we have Duterte, and Greece has spent the last 5 years with street fights between Golden Dawn and like anarchists who come to the country to protect people. Like, I've heard those stories, should I say. And so it's extremely disconcerting, and that's like an understatement, especially from a left perspective, because the election of Trump was shocking, and it did lead to an increase in hate crimes, but he wasn't like explicitly saying commit hate crimes, whereas Bolsonaro kind of is.
Right.
It's scary from a left perspective because it could easily lead to armed conflict, I would say. But then Brazil has a lot of police violence.
Yeah. I mean, it's I think the for me, one of the lessons is this really does show what happens when there really is a weakness of the left, and I think in Brazil it's interesting because it's obviously been in some ways the consequence of a campaign, but it's also not, the Workers' Party in Brazil has some of the same problems that even the Venezuelan socialists. I mean, these are not necessarily parties that are talking about a genuine break with capitalism, and so they are. I think it is some ways showing the contradictions or the limitations of that kind of, whatever you want to call it, Bolivarian socialism or whatever. I just think it's an example of like the limits of social democracy.
I would agree. I've heard a lot of analyses like this I heard this about the Sandinistas as well. That like they followed a neoliberal policy. We just still wanted them out in Nicaragua. And I think it is a sign of like this whole, we have lost the ability to, in America, we've lost the ability to govern well and like actually distribute resources to the people who need them, and actually fix shortfalls maybe in a market or in like a health system. And it's damaged our reputation, even though the reason that it happened in America, and probably the reason it's happening in a lot of other countries, is because the right was able to take power using political strategy and then gut the state, which is Naomi Klein 101, disaster capitalism. Like it's happened, and so back to journalism, like we need stronger institutions fighting this stuff. Because like the Panama Papers came out, right, and there was a bunch of reporting about the end of like this secrecy among these billionaires who are stealing a bunch of money, and then nothing happens.
Yeah, and then the journalists get killed in Malta. No one cares.
The leaker, I believe, she got.
Was it the leaker?
A journalist did get killed as well.
Yeah.
But a leaker as well. I believe the woman who leaked the stuff. She either ended up dead or in jail. Maybe I shouldn't be spreading that.
Well, there's definitely regardless, there's consequences for these kinds of things, and they tend to slide under the radar when you have giant forces like Trump and like all the election in Brazil, all these kind of things that take the headlines, where these really huge stories that aren't quite as sexy or provocative or outrage provoking, even though this is outrageous.
The issue is that the story doesn't make them look good or make their enemies look bad, and that's where we can get to manufacturing consent and what that's actually about. It's because what Noam Chomsky loves to say is that they give you true information. It's just they're giving it to you in the order that they choose to give it to you in. But that's not a direct saying, but that's basically what he's talking about with manufacturing consent, is that they create salience. Salience is a term for important in journalism when you're talking about why you might cover a story. They choose what's salient. They choose this, Venezuela people are losing weight. Let's make that the lead story. And then we accidentally bombed some children. We should cover that as a retrospective, add it to put it at the end, and add it to a story about problems with underfunding the military. It's sad. But there are systems that are coming up from journalists, and this is a big distinction I feel like needs to be made more often, is the difference between journalism and opinion. Because that's what CNN and Fox actually do, is they give people opinions and then they have an hour of journalism. I learned that from Jon Stewart.
And I think he was fantastic in pointing out those kinds of things. Not necessarily that it's just opinion, but just the fact that even what is opinion is so diluted of actual, you can just have constant what the fuck moments because they're so, they are so ridiculous.
And they get eyes. People love it when the newsroom is more like a WWE fight, than a serious news story where they're supposed to be only reporting verified facts.
Which is why when Jon Stewart went on Crossfire, to me that was one of the most special moments in television, because he went there and basically was and the grand irony is that one of the people he was talking to is Tucker Carlson, who is now on gets millions of eyeballs every night. He's not wearing his stupid fucking bow tie anymore. That was one thing that Jon Stewart
he doesn't
did. No, I don't think so. I think he wears regular ties now. And he has that stupid face every time someone else is talking. Tucker Carlson.
Yeah,
the funny thing is, if you read Tucker Carlson from the early 90s, it's not actually terrible journalism, actually interesting and not just this, but he's become such a, but anyway, that moment when Jon Stewart went on, it was just you guys do know what, and it was that Crossfire was that the sort of emblematic show about the whole let's have a fake talking points conservative and a fake talking points liberal, quote unquote, and then they'll just talk past each other and talk the points to each other, and nothing will ever happen, and then we'll sell some ads.
And they don't tell you that they're fake liberals and conservatives in the opening, of course.
And so then they become the representation in the minds of the viewers about what a conservative is and what a liberal is.
Which is more manufacturing consent right there. The part which is just about only giving
the kind of Overton window.
Well, because the Overton window is the vote for the lesser of evil every time, and your evil becomes more evil.
It's the idea that there's a window that is the sort of suitable differences, the suitable opinions, like the way, like these are the things that we can talk about, and whatever's outside of that is like, that's just crazy. That's just, we can't talk about it.
Absolutely, that is what I'm talking about. Because he makes a big point of saying that the best way to control the debate is to give them two sides of an issue and let them debate vociferously within those questions. But then anything outside of those questions becomes taboo to talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
Good catch.
No, yeah, but that's. I mean, I think that we are like, what I wonder about. I think actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about is there is the propaganda model in manufacturing consent is it's obviously still valid with things like the New York Times and certainly the Washington Post having its single owner be Jeff Bezos and stuff, but the thing that I think there really is a need for an update to manufacturing consent that I think actually it is difficult to do, and I understand that Noam Chomsky, God bless his soul, it is getting up there in age and may not necessarily have the total capacity to really do the kind of work that he did with manufacturing consent on this issue, but there is a traditional media and there's social media. They're intertwined, they're interconnected, but they're two heads of the sort of monster, I guess, that is media. And there's obviously the traditional elements that we would talk about in manufacturing consent, the maintenance of the Overton window, the advertising, the advertising element that we need to make sure that things are palpable for advertising. So there's all those, and then the being on bended knee to authority, so that the people that you really want to be friend with are like Joe Biden and Barack Obama and not socialist alternative or some kind of so it's all that same kind of thing that happens in traditional media, but with social media it's obviously different. And so I wonder how you sort of think about this manufacturing consent model when it comes to social media. Where does it apply? Where does it where do we need a new understanding of kind of the role of social media? And social media has been very impactful for the Tahrir Square was like, that was because of Facebook and organizing on Facebook and things like that. Now that was almost 10 years ago, crazy enough. So how do we understand social media, especially if we are coming from that manufacturing consent mindset?
Yeah, the communications realm has grown so much since then, because there was a very limited number of sources that you could even, and I guess it was probably easier to verify information when there are fewer experts, and then fewer people who are well educated enough to pretend to be an expert as well. And so I would say that consent is still being manufactured. I just wonder if there are more people who are being made, because when you're manufacturing consent, there are always going to be the people who don't believe you. There are always going to be the people who don't believe anything the government says, just reactionarily. And then there are going to be people who, in some cases just have common sense. And in some cases, people who have very specialized information. And when you're trying to put misinformation or disinformation past them, they just catch it because they're better educated. Noam Chomsky being probably somebody who's really good at that.
Yeah.
But what you're able to do is with Facebook, say, you still have, Occupy Democrats, Turning Point USA. They create acceptable opinion. And then you have Alex Jones, and you have like the Free Thought Project and the people who are being censored. Or just, and you don't even need to censor people though, because ridicule, it works.
Yep.
and then you polarize the audience, and like the people who are already not believing your stuff maybe become more likely to go check out this new information that's like taboo. But you also maintain this vanguard of well-educated young people who are still believing crap.
And I mean, you know, we obviously have a thing that, you know, I think there was this trend for a long time. It didn't necessarily have the big label, but with social media specifically, and with the 2016 election, and with the widespread ability to, you know, just spread information, there's a lot of the ability to spread disinformation. And what we've seen, obviously, is the rise of the fake news. And that's obviously been interestingly co-opted into and rolled into the enemy of the people comments and things like that. But, you know, when you have a newspaper in your town, that's where you get your local news, right? Or you have like the local news that you get your local news. And you have the big city newspaper that gives you your kind of regional news and some of the national news. And maybe you read the New York Times. You've got 4 or 5 sources of information, and you use those to make your opinions. And those have been gatekept and curated, maintaining the Overton window, all in that manufacturing consent model. But finite points of information that people can like use as their ability to say, this is why I hold X opinion, because I read Y in the New York Times. Now you have social media where my buddy Bob sent me this article about how this crazy shit's happening, and it's from, you know, News Central ppq.com, or, you know, it's like some website that, you know, I don't know, it's not the trustworthy sources, it's not the traditional gatekeepers, it isn't, you know, Noam Chomsky's agenda setting media that he uses in manufacturing consent. And so for me, trying to understand this like new dynamic that's coming from social media of fake news, of like outrage inducing stories masquerading as journalism, and then, you know, something like BuzzFeed is something to me that I think you could probably have an hour conversation about on its own, because it's this 10 ways to, I don't give a shit, you know, 10 ways to do whatever.
10 ways to clean your dishes. Also, we just did like a deep undercover investigation.
Right, exactly.
Like, where did that come from?
Right, so like, and you know, and some of the investigations are like spot on and really well sourced and like really good investigative journalism. And some of it's like garbage, like gotcha and outrage journalism, right? And so it's really, really hard. Whereas before you might have had, like you were saying, the people who just knee jerk, like, that's what the State Department says. Fuck the State Department. I'm not going to listen to that shit. Yeah. And then you have the people who are like, well, it's the State Department. They know what they're talking about, so I'm going to believe it. Now you have endless, endless sources, and everybody being able to source material that's not traceable, traceable anywhere. And so I don't know. Like, I guess in general, like fake news and disinformation. I mean, how do you even think about this?
I love the idea that a fake news story could bring down the Walton family or like the Koch brothers. But I'm not endorsing this. Sorry. Well,
I get it though.
One of the reasons I like media production is almost because of Ender's Game. His brother and his sister in Ender's Game, when he goes up into space, his brother and sister basically start a revolution and change the world with what I think sounds like a blogging platform. And so, like, you know, that is an element perhaps that could be investigated for revolutionary purposes with like zines. They did that in the 80s.
Yep.
And I don't really know the effects it had, but I'm sure a lot of people learned important information from them.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the key of why a lot of people should be performing journalism. But yeah, there's also this terrifying element of somebody could, you know, a Nigerian prince could convince your grandma to give up her retirement, and that can just happen to your family, and then you get hit with these massive costs of supporting your grandma, kind of thing. I mean, disinformation is a terrible thing. I mean, I guess it's just also, it's used for complete corruption and greed, and it's also used in like intelligence for national schemes, evil. And so I guess it is kind of scary if you just bringing up the fact that like not only does like your neighborhood evil villain, the really smart person in your community who happens to hate everybody, could like trick everybody into like standing in dog poop, but also your neighborhood spook could use this information against you as a socialist organizer.
Yeah.
And, you know, trick you somehow. So, yeah, there is a lot of insecurity there and a lot of opportunity.
But like, you know, to be able to really navigate especially the social media sphere and to be able to like even source good data is I think like in orders of magnitude more difficult than it was even 10 or 15 years ago, because there is so like, it's great that we're able to share information the way we are on like social media, but there is so much information that the skill you have to be able to decipher what's legit and what's not, and the kind of steps you have to go through to really be able to process the data. It's quite obvious that there's a lot of people who lack those skills. And it seems to me that whereas you might have had this agenda-setting media manufacturing consent kind of model to maintain a sort of status quo and a sort of maintenance of a ruling class hegemony, what you've seen with social media, I think with Trump, though there is obviously being in bed with the general disposition of the ruling class, a real disruption of the, say, traditional norms of ruling class control in the United States. And so this media environment has fueled, I mean, I think is if not solely the predominant factor in the rise of people like Donald Trump and
Bolsonaro.
God, I'm terrible.
I would also look towards like declining education, the declining standards of education. I think that a lot of people were, you know, they graduated high school without knowing a lot of important things.
Yeah.
And that's generations of people. And you know, there is an argument to make that they did that to people so that they would be good factory workers, which is disgusting. But it's, you know, it's inhumane. It's capitalist. It's like, that's how we go abroad and do much worse things to governments and people so that they'll be cheap labor. Right. So no surprise they're going to deprive some Americans of a good education, and then deprive a lot of Americans of basic access to protection, so to welfare, and, you know, give them access to really bad food, which it's bad for your health in general. I think that's another element, specifically the education, really, but the poverty and the symptoms of living in poverty also, I think, have caused a lot of that, and the patriot attitude that's like, because we're in late stage capitalism, and like there are a lot of people who their dads made a lot of money working in a factory, and now they're finding out that they're about to be basically unemployed or working at McDonald's, and you know, they're paying for somebody in their family's like heroin addiction,
or got student loans.
They're paying back student loans or failing to pay back student loans, and they're furious, and they're listening to the Republicans. They're listening to this conversation about like immigrants being the problem and lazy people being the problem and liberals being the problem because we destroyed the economy or something. And they're really upset and mad, and they're killing people now. I mean, you know, can imagine America being described as an armed conflict in like the next 10 years. Like,
yeah, I mean, that was one of the news articles. Obviously this week there was the bomber. What my buddy called it. I want to coin this and spread it. It's the MAGA bomber, right?
Yeah,
the Make America Great Again bomber. That's. I mean, if we got the Unabomber, and I don't know why it's Una. He sent like 1 million, so I don't know why it's one.
Yeah, I don't
whatever.
know that either.
But like now we have the MAGA bomber or the Trump bomber, right? So yeah, I mean, and this guy's got anti-CNN shit, plastered.
I would say not endorsing anything. The Unabomber, I think, was probably a lot more intelligent.
Yes.
than it's going to turn out that this guy is.
Right.
His manifesto was good.
Right. You can cut out pages of the manifesto where it gets a little crazy and not read those parts, and then just read like the good parts, and you're like, God damn. I mean, I was talking about like an MIT graduate and stuff like that. This guy was living in his van. Now, Ted was living off the grid, but intentionally off the grid,
and he was going crazy.
Yeah, exactly. This guy was living in his van, and I'm not sure we know much more about him than that.
Oh, he was living in that van?
Living in the van. They don't know how long he was in the van.
In Trump's America.
Yeah, man. Yeah, in Miami. I mean, imagine that.
Are you guys part of the crooked media?
What's the crooked media?
Well, the crooked media is a liberal media that portrays Trump as, a bad person and makes Hillary look like she's an angel.
Hasn't the media in general been reporting only about Hillary Clinton's emails lately? Surely it's been pretty balanced.
But it's a lot of stuff they're keeping out from the general public.
You just don't like hearing negative things about Donald Trump, do you?
Well, that's true, but it's what, I mean...
Why shouldn't we report negative things about Donald Trump? Are you saying there are none?
Well, no, it's no negative things about Trump.
No negative things?
No.
So anyone that reports that...
It's controversial, but it's not, I mean, from my point of view, nothing's negative.
He's all good.
He's all good in my books. And I think, the media, you guys are the ones that are the crooked ones with Hillary.
One question I think, in journalism, there's obviously things like if it bleeds, it leads. And there is a tendency for, the creation of outrage. And now it's become really like the clickbait, the headline. Because let's be honest, lots of people read headlines, not a lot of people read articles. And so, what do you think about this kind of this trend in the clickbaiting or the 10 reasons why and stuff like that? What do you think about that?
Well, so this is a good segue, honestly. I think it's just this. I think the journalism's dead. I think that when it comes to like a large fourth estate that's doing a job of watching the government, and there's funding for what they're doing. They're independent. They don't have all kinds of like donors forcing them to write about one thing. I think that that's not alive. I think that, if there are journalists in the Washington Post and in the New York Times, they're the best journalists in the country, I assume, but they're writing about, they're writing hit pieces about people who suggest anything left of center, and they're covering stories about like Trump's America, sap stories for people who have complete power in this country. They're not representing America as it is. They're representing it as works for the economy, or I feel. And I think that the segue here is like, what is journalism?
Right.
Because journalism gets thrown around a lot. I think a lot of people are claiming to be journalists who are bloggers, and aren't blogger journalists. They're not doing independent research. They're not like verifying everything. They probably don't have an editor, which isn't very important, but it
can help.
Yeah, if you're not that thorough in your research, or if you're easy to trick, then you need a team around you. But then, as we were saying earlier, not everybody has these data skills, these research skills. And so I think that what's going to happen is, and it's happening, there's probably like 10,000 different startups right now trying to work out a platform for collaborative journalism. And they're going to do it in lots of different ways, I'm sure. But I think I've heard of one, which is probably the most famous one, which is by Barrett. I've forgotten his name. He's very famous in the journalism scene. He went to jail while writing for The Intercept. Barrett Brown.
Okay.
And he started what's going to be basically a platform where people can, if they've got a story, they put it and all their information into the platform, and then other people can work on the story. And I think his thinking is that if somebody gets compromised or killed, then the story doesn't die with them.
Yeah.
I think it's very smart.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the name of the platform he's using, but I think that's where a lot of that stuff is going to go, into like collaborative journalism, where you can have, if you need an interview in San Francisco, you don't have to fly to San Francisco because you have somebody in your network who can do the interview and send it to you. If you need a audio from somewhere, you just work it out with the team, and it wouldn't make much money at all. And that's kind of the point, almost, is that like if the media is doing a good job, then society should be pretty fine. We should be dealing with our if there's a good journalistic community, then the white collar crime should be getting caught, and the people should be paying their taxes because they want to.
The priorities would be straight.
Hopefully, one would hope. Yeah. The man under socialism kind of thing, right? But that's putting the cart before the horse. But it's a very important industry, I think, because it's supposed to be the fourth estate, and that would be very useful right now because the government is out of our control. And
the media is you hear a lot of criticism of of Trump and stuff like that on places like CNN and obviously MSNBC, but yeah, it doesn't appear to be like what you're saying, especially it's opinion. So it's just a lot of people spouting off what they think and then having interviews where it's just talking back and forth based on talking points and stuff like that. And so that's obviously not, I guess, journalism. Is there anywhere that you can find right now? I mean, you're saying journalism is sort of dead, and there's this emerging, which I love, this like collaborative ability so that you really can get your facts right and you can prioritize what should be important because you're removing the idea that, we're going to base it on advertising or something like that. Like it's going to be just what should be covered because it's obviously the most important story and things like that. Is there anywhere that you think there is good journalism happening? Absolutely. And I think the real thing is that nothing is Titanic, but, because there is going to be good journalism anywhere where there's somebody who's practicing journalism. I'm a fan of The Intercept. They get a bit of hassle from like the online far left, but in general, I think that they're doing these investigative pieces that impress me and that do call out crimes that have been happening. They also, I think, do a good job of speaking to the proletariat, basically. I think that they cover stories of these poor people living in post 2008 America, where like there are a lot more people struggling than everybody realizes. So I'm a big fan of them. I like The Real News. I think that The Real News does a great job of being independent and covering progressive issues in general. I like
I mean, I do like a lot of the people who are doing opinion and like I like Jimmy Dore. You know, he's not breaking stories, but he is like
giving commentary.
Yeah, and connecting with people.
And funny.
And he's funny, yeah. Him and obviously Lee Camp, who is brilliant with Redacted Tonight.
Yeah.
And my friend Eleanor Goldfield, she has a show called Act Out, and it's news for activists. And it's very entertaining and very informative. And it really highlights the people who are in the middle of the fight, which I think all leftists dream of being in the middle. All leftists need to be in the fight. And I think that the fight is being held together not really by leftists, but by people, by poor people who found themselves in the way of the machine that's crushing into them. And here I'm talking about the pipeline resistance people. You know, a lot of these things happened because these companies tried to railroad these families, and the families didn't want it to happen, so they invited people to come and protest on their property. And, you know, those people need our respect and solidarity.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand. There is this is something that I've found, and I wonder if you think, like, what you think the consequences of this are. But there's this notion of making news. That what making news is when you catch somebody saying something stupid, right? I found this to be one of the most, it's almost like a caricature of itself. The idea that modern, say, like, especially 24-hour or, like, you know, I guess traditional media, the CNNs and stuff like that, that obviously it's kind of a joke that on CNN, there's always, it just always says breaking news. Like, the bottom of the thing literally always says breaking news, because anytime anybody says anything, it's like it's breaking news. And, you know, I guess I think this is in some ways a reaction to, but also feeding into a shortening of, let's say, the attention span, right? You had, if you're looking back at different periods of time, you have people with, frankly, large gaps of time that need to be filled. And it can easily be filled by sitting in a chair and reading War and Peace or, you know, Huckleberry Finn. And not saying that people don't still do that, but they're obviously doing it a hell of a lot less than they used to do. And, you know, and that you have the television and all those kinds of things. And now you're at the point of, like, social media where your fucking phone buzzes in your pocket constantly, so you're just constantly checking it, and you can sit there and watch Twitter if you want, you know. So the shortening of the attention span, the idea that, you know, good journalism, you read John Reed or you read, you know, long, like, good journalism, you know, even Hemingway or something, when doing journalism, like with making those the pieces that are specifically just about giving the news. They are long. They are detailed. You know, when you read Panama Papers article, like, stories, they are not short. They are very long and they're very intricate. These are incredibly detailed and nuanced and difficult stories that you can't do in 30 seconds. It's the reason Noam Chomsky's not on CNN, because he has a problem with concision. Say your point in 30 seconds. So, I don't know. What do you think that this is? I don't know. Do you think it's a reaction? Do you think it's feeding it? How do you think what is its effect on, or what is its role in killing journalism?
I think that it's almost just a very human thing. I think that entertainment in general is that the human mind is generally quite simple and dark, and it likes to escape from itself, and it doesn't always have people around, especially a long time ago. And so, you know, you would interact with anything. Now we're completely stimulated all the time. If your eyes are open, you know, kids are seeing thousands of brands in a day, or whatever that statistic is. And I do think people's attention spans are dying, are changing, are becoming a lot shorter. But I also think that could be part of the key to bringing good journalism back, is working out how to communicate with those people. Not those people. I'm one of those people. I will find myself checking my email 80 times in a day, kind of thing. The issue, I think, is like a lack of sympathy for people who aren't thinking that fast. I think a lot more people are overwhelmed and tired, and just, their lives don't really give them that much time to like rest their brains and like come back and come at you fresh. And so there have got to be better ways to communicate with these people to get the message through. And I think from education, that is generally just repetition and not going above their heads. And so like this one idea I have is for a podcast where I basically explain what I'm about to read to somebody, read it to them, and then go back over it. And it's a lot
just
like
a news story or something, or like a longer thing.
But either both.
Okay.
But just as like a format for, because then they don't have to read it, for one thing.
Yep.
They can listen to it in the car. They can listen to it multiple times easily. And I would be I'm specifically thinking at first to do texts and political texts. And so I would be breaking it down into 5-10 minutes of text and then talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think that, a lot of other people are coming up with ways to do this. The MIT has a really cool lab that is focused on communicating with people and using technology to do it.
Yeah.
And with, pretty much everybody has a laptop nowadays. I feel everybody has their phone. I think a lot more people are using YouTube on their phone or something now. So I think there's opportunity for addressing that, but absolutely it's also causing people just not to read the news. It pushes people really deep into their echo chambers because they have one friend who they think is caught up with the news, and that person tells them all their opinions every Sunday. And then they go and they repeat their opinions to their friends who don't read the news. And so that's probably helping spread disinformation. But hopefully we can use it in some way to really communicate with people better.
So I guess your opinion of Twitter must be, I guess, nuanced in that sense, because I mean that's a quick way of communicating things, but that quick way is also limited and competing with a lot of noise. So what do you think about Twitter?
I mean, I think Twitter is a hellscape. I think that entering the Twitter world, unless you are really good at ignoring things people say to you when you just should.
Like really mean and terrible things.
Yeah, the worst things, just for nothing. Then it's fine, but I think it makes people a lot meaner. But yeah, it is the whole very short format text. It forces people to be to be clear and concise in a short period, which is an interesting creative thing. And with all the emojis and stuff, I think it's a really good way of reaching people and piquing their interest into something and then getting them to go down the rabbit hole.
Gotcha. Which you can do on a platform like YouTube or something like that, right? I think everyone has had the experience of going down some rabbit hole on YouTube and finding themselves at 4 in the morning going, oh shit, I should probably go to bed.
But I just learned about some galaxy outside.
Yeah, exactly. Or even like found out how crazy flat earth people are or whatever.
Oh my God, I love those videos.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I've made some space videos on YouTube, and so anytime anybody watches the space videos, they tend to get like flat earth stuff or UFO conspiracies. So that's one thing I wonder about, like the role of the algorithm. Right? I mean, Google has this, I mean, you might as well call it the God algorithm at this point. I mean, it's the information dissemination and cultivation algorithm, and it's determining a lot. I mean, it's creating those kind of echo chambers. Facebook has an equivalent algorithm that's creating these echo chambers and these like sort of things. And then at the same time, they're doing things like putting a little notification on the YouTube ads. This is a Russian, RT is paid for by the Russian government. Be afraid. And so, there is this control of, Facebook is obviously a media and information, disseminating thing, but it doesn't have any of the traditional constraints or ways of gatekeeping that something like the New York Times or these other like agenda-setting media did. And instead, they have these algorithms that are intending to show you things that I think in some ways were supposed to make you happy, but are quite obviously making everyone miserable. And so, I don't know. How do you feel about the role of algorithms and companies like Alphabet and Facebook and stuff like that to be able to determine what we see?
I think we ceded a lot of power by accident, and I don't think they even Google, I don't think would have really, I don't know. I don't know how Google would have known that they were gaining that much power when they created the search engine. I don't believe they were even the first ones to create one. So yeah. I think that we ceded a lot of power to them. Like, I think it's terrifying that Google and Facebook are able to influence elections because they're owned by billionaires. I think that, I mean, yeah, it's just scary because like a major part of power, of just having power, is being able to communicate to the people who are supposedly like under your power.
Yeah.
If you can communicate with them and remind them that they're under your power, then they're still under your power until they rebel or whatever. And it's very hard to think of a way where a non-corporate entity would be able to overtake the power that like these people have claimed. Imagine receiving an email like 50 years down the line from now, basically saying Google is now your sovereign.
Yeah.
It's not impossible to imagine, simply because in the age of Trump, nothing's impossible to imagine. Like, Trump will probably do it first. I probably just gave Trump this idea.
Exactly. You're giving suggestions of what they could do. If you don't like Trump, they just go with Google.
Yeah. You saw, in fact, that Redacted Tonight just did a set like this. And the only thing that I think is good about it is that it gives us an extra tool that we can use in the future. In the same way that, or in the exact opposite way from how giving the president more powers means that eventually some terrible psychopath is going to have hold of those powers. When psychopaths give themselves power, one day the people could take that power as well. Because, with the net neutrality argument, my favorite way to come at the net neutrality argument is to think of the public utilities that we could build and just take that market. Public with the banking argument. It's terrible and it seems really overwhelming, but we could seriously undermine the banks by turning the post offices into banks and by creating community banks and development banks, and like the people could do that and they would piss off a lot of people really badly and it would be hilarious.
Right. It
would be civil conflict too.
Yeah.
We'd probably get sued at first, and then the people behind it would probably just like leave the country abruptly because they're terrified.
I guess one thing that maybe is a way to leave it, because we did just talk about how people have short attention spans and we are over the hour limit, but just a sort of surveying of the situation. You have given a few examples of places where I think there is, and I would agree generally. I mean, I do personally have some issues with like Glenn Greenwald and Mehdi Hassan and some people at The Intercept, though I do think that there is a lot of good journalism. And I think Glenn Greenwald, when he's not doing hit pieces of people that he shouldn't be doing hit pieces on, he's doing great journalism. And so I appreciate his journalism. I don't appreciate when he doesn't do his investigative journalism, because that's where his talent, I think, really lies. But the sort of situation of say radical left or leftist journalism, the prospects for the future, sort of where we are now, where we could go, and what it would take to get us, where we could be.
Yeah, right now we're seriously damaged. A lot of the groups who are trying to do the whole independent street journalism thing are hemorrhaging money. But they're also, I think the big one who I'm ashamed I forgot earlier is Unicorn Riot. Unicorn Riot is an organization who saw a catastrophe, which is the American public discourse right now and the situation of the American working poor. And they were probably sick of being labor and were inspired by somebody to just go out and start asking people questions, filming them and putting them on TV, and then going to the big protests. And I think, I've only ever met one of them briefly while I was covering a protest. And I don't know how well they're doing, actually. I hope they're doing really well. You should go donate to them. But they are doing a really important thing no matter what. And I think the real issue is that we're a very privileged generation with, there was a lot of money made in our parents' generation. A lot of people at least have something now. And, that is being classist because I'm talking about myself.
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of people like me. And I think that that they need to be just doing journalism. And I would like to actually, before we end, I would actually like to just read a list of the principles of journalism according to, the establishment people who, the organization whose name I've forgotten, but I'll read to you in a second, and what it is. And because I want to inspire people to do journalism, but I also want them, through doing this interview, but I want them to understand what journalism is as well, because, a lot of disinformation gets spread by people with good intentions.
Yeah. Right. I see a lot of that. I know that you had the right reason for wanting to spread this idea or even this meme, and I mean meme by idea, not a picture or whatever, but want to communicate these ideas. And I know that the idea was good behind it, but some of it's shit. And it's part of that whole disinformation thing. And so, yeah, okay, I want to hear the principles so you're saying there are principles that the main, that sort of traditional journalism holds? Is that what you're talking about?
This is what you would learn in a college, in a 100 level college journalism course. This is what they would tell you journalism is. And then when you get into if you were to get into a major media group, I think a lot of this goes out the window.
It's what is it? Speaking truth to power.
Totally. Yeah. Journalism it's a revolutionary thing. It should be a revolutionary thing. You should look into this guy, I.F. Stone. And he was writing just in early 20th century America, and he was just eviscerating power. But he couldn't find an employer. He actually created a newsletter, and it became massive. But he got fired from his first employers, and there are lots of examples of great investigative journalists who couldn't find employers. In fact, that's why Robert Scheer could definitely find an employer, because he's amazing at what he does. But, that's why he's doing Truthdig, and Truthdig's another amazing news source.
But you did, because you're right. I mean, you did have, even people like Karl Marx and other people who, Jack London, though Jack London had success with his novels, not as much success with his journalism, which is really good. Even, Upton Sinclair Lewis, you have people who are doing journalism and really that's not the key to their success or their really notoriety, though it's really good journalism. Yep. Or Orwell, amazing journalism, but that's not what people are known for. It's the book. Yep,
Ernest Hemingway as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And most of these people were pretty awesome allies, and
exactly.
They were into solidarity.
Yeah,
which is important.
Even Ed Murrow to a certain degree.
Yeah,
I mean, with all the constraints, he's still.
That was a terrifying time to be alive.
No kidding. Yeah, when you're not even a communist and you're still.
Yeah.
Terrible when you're a communist, but even worse when you're not.
Yeah. What is it? The communists, like half of the membership of the communists in like the
50s.
Yeah,
the late
were
50s.
FBI agents. Yeah. Or something.
Like every meeting had an informant.
Yeah,
and you got to read the COINTELPRO manuals, man. They're great. Like if you ever go to a meeting and somebody's being really disruptive, which there tends to be, I always think that person's a COINTELPRO agent, because that's like the main thing they told you to do. Just go in there and be like, well, what about Stalin or something, and then just screw it all up.
Those are my favorite conversations in direct action circles. Is just like, about COINTELPRO, right? Yeah, man, you can never trust them.
Fake news. Fake news. You are fake news. We are not going to let the fake news tell us what to do. Very fake news. You're dishonest people. The dishonest media. Your organization is
attacking the fake media.
CNN's fake news. I don't take questions. I don't take questions from CNN. That was just fake news by NBC, which gives a lot of fake news. It's frankly disgusting the way the press is able to write whatever they want to write.
Okay, so the principles of journalism, these were drafted by a group called the Committee of Concerned Journalists. Okay, so first is journalism's first obligation is to the truth. Second, its first loyalty is to citizens. Its essence is discipline of verification, and this is a very important one that I feel really divides the people who think that they're doing journalism and are actually just doing PR, basically, is that they are reporting just what they've seen once. And it takes a lot of resources to be a newsroom that can double verify everything. But
it's an important principle.
So its practitioners must remain an independence from those from those they cover, which is another thing that a lot of left journalists, I feel, don't fully embrace.
Yeah.
Or a lot of independent left journalists, I've found it tough because as an independent amateur, I was going to a lot of protests with a camera, and it took me a while to really get the balance between just being like, yeah, we're about to burn the White House down, and 300 people just tried to burn the White House down.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so you do need to remain impartial there, and a lot of people would argue with me about that. It must serve as an independent monitor of power, the Fourth Estate, if only. It must provide a forum for public criticism and compromise, and there we have those, but nobody's having the same conversations or even listening to each other. And I feel like that's a place where a lot of like direct democracy softwares that people are talking about could really come in handy, where you can communicate your issues with the society at large, at night in a comment box.
Yeah, right. Much more accessibility to the people that you want to hear from and want to communicate to, so that you can make it salient in the real way.
Yeah. And you don't need to have all that extra time, money, and energy to get to the meeting that they hold once a year when your kids are like doing a play.
Yeah, right.
It must strive to make the significant, interesting, and relevant. And this is important because of local politics, really. It's important because of a lot of things, but important issues are often boring.
Yeah.
Like actually the nitty-gritty of society coming up with some magical response to climate change right now is very technical and boring.
Yeah.
It's like measuring
bits of carbon in ice or some shit. Like, I don't even know.
Yeah, once a year, and then like working out a proper plan and implementing that plan and making sure that every nut and bolt gets screwed tightly.
My eyes are already rolling over.
Yeah, but we do need that stuff to be important.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're all going to die from climate change.
And essentially what that in maybe modern parlance, that's making the unsexy sexy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, because it's way too easy. Like, look at what gets a lot of headlines. I mean, when you look at the thing that's most depressing to me, honestly, is you look at views on YouTube. Look what gets the views on YouTube. Fucking makeup tutorial videos, or like nonsense, bullshit, music videos, whatever. Like, nothing that's educational at all, right?
Not the sensible socialist.
Yes,
yet.
exactly.
That's
yeah,
what
exactly. We need millions of views.
Yeah, that's what we're saying right here. Okay.
But you know, when you really do see that where there is a lot of really interesting things on the internet generally, and those and there's it's just not always being made sexy, you know, or it not being made appealing, and that the idea of making the important appealing, that's what is it, the significance, making the significant
interesting and relevant.
Yes.
And it's like trying to speak to the monkey that is inside and like get their attention real quick so that you can help them in some way.
Clickbait.
Oh, you know,
the right kind of clickbait.
When you said making the unsexy sexy, I was thinking we should pitch to BuzzFeed.
Yeah,
we should do this for BuzzFeed, and then all of Marxism, just like, yeah, we'll make Marxism sexy.
Yeah, we need to. Teen Vogue is doing not a bad job with that.
They
they're killing it.
They really are. They
I don't know what happened at Teen Vogue, but I'm all for it. Must have had a change in editorial staff.
Well, no, I think what happened is they have a good PR person,
and they have young people on the staff.
Yeah, that is actually a very good point. But also, I'm thinking, because it pretty much happened as soon as Trump came in, and they were talking about native issues, and they just did this Marx piece, didn't they? And a girl I know, I was speaking to her the other day, and she is writing a piece about the opioid pandemic right now. Pandemic. But they're really doing great work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But even there, we're talking about like they saw an opportunity and they took it, and it's great that was seen as a profitable opportunity.
Sure. Yeah. It's getting out there.
Yep.
To the right people.
Yeah. I mean, because Marxist analysis is still very relevant to everything we're doing. I just picked up Chris Hedges' new book, and like in the first chapter, he basically just says how Marx was right and how leading up to the crisis that we're in right now.
The specter is still haunting.
The specter is definitely still haunting. Yeah. And not just Europe.
Right.
We're coming for you.
It's the world now. Yeah. It's going to be much easier for the workers of the world to unite.
One would hope.
Yeah.
Number 8. It must keep the news comprehensive and proportional. And so I think that relates to not only being just very accurate, but also that when they used to have the fairness doctrine where you would have to talk to people on both sides of the issue.
And I think the show, The Newsroom, really expressed that well in a really concise way. You know, they asked like, what are you talking about with the fairness thing? And he was like, yeah, look, if Congress had a debate about whether it snowed Wednesday, and we know whether it snowed Wednesday, the article in the paper would say Republicans and Democrats disagree on whether it snowed, right? Not half the people in Congress don't realize it didn't snow. You know what I mean? Like, so proportionality, right? You can have a discussion about climate science and the legitimacy of it and the problems with it, but if you do that in a way that makes it appear as though the scientists are 50-50, that's not proportional. It's not showing the situation as it really is. You can show both sides without being ridiculous.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's still an important thing to consider, that you shouldn't be just like, because then you're suppressing the news.
Yes.
You're censoring people.
Yep.
But also, if their opinion is unscientific and opinion, and then there's no reason. The only reason to talk about Exxon and their connection to climate denial is to talk about charging them with like damning our species. Like, I don't think we should be letting anybody who's been paid by them speak on CNN right now about the climate issue.
Yeah.
But I never watch CNN anyway.
And yeah, because but that would even, because that would be proportional. Their ability to influence the narrative, let's say, just in the general sort of sense of the narrative, is already so disproportionate, based on at least even number of people. I mean, their power is so huge that their ability to maintain a narrative that serves their interest is, so suppressing their ability to maintain that hegemony isn't suppression. It's fairness.
Yeah.
And proportionality.
It works out for some people. Okay, and so the last one is, its practitioners must be allowed to exercise their personal conscience. And I think that would also apply to this climate change conversation.
Yeah.
And to Trump's bigotry. And to the fact that, like, we are locking kids up. That's barbaric.
Right. Yeah, I mean, would you say, like, so that brings up a question about the sort of real fine line between opinion and journalism, right? Because, I mean, I think you're saying that a journalist can say in a moment, this person said X, and that was fucked up.
Yeah. Unless they're on certain networks, in which case they'd have to say, I disagree with this vehemently. Yeah. Or there are probably a lot of ways of saying that.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think... Yeah, you know what I mean. Like, there is, I could think, an idea in some aspects of journalism where we are so ivory tower, right? That we are not going to, wade into that, and it's just this happened, period, and no kind of perspectivizing. I don't know if that's a word, but like like putting it in perspective. And then you have this opposite where the opinion people are taking one story and only doing opinion.
And saying it means something that really they just want it to mean.
Yeah, right.
And then, there is like a whole element of how we are just making up the reality we want. I think probably a good amount of climate change is just absolute existential terror. Because the more you know about it, the scarier it is.
What do you think is the way to get more, I guess, attention? I mean, obviously everybody knows the climate change issue. We've all been exposed to it, but do we need a movie? I mean, we did have, what is it, The Day After Tomorrow or something? Yeah. And, that was a while ago. That didn't apparently, like, what do we need to?
Well, I think the psychological answer would be you need to make it relevant to people, but then I really feel like because to make it relevant to people you need to humanize things, and I really feel like a lot of people, especially in the West nowadays with all this access to information, are being I think we're being desensitized to violence at this rate. And I think that it also applies to our humanity, and that I think it's a lot easier now to watch, these islands get hit by these massive tsunamis and see this footage where people are definitely dying.
And just going, whoa.
Yeah, and just being like, and I think there are a lot of conversations where people say that's a tragedy now, but I think that there was a time where that would be a 9/11 kind of incident.
Yeah.
If you got that footage and if you see these people, because you only see so many humans in your life, I think, and it used to be far fewer.
Yeah.
And now it's,
There's
you
so
see
many of us that,
and it's easy to become callous to things like that. And so I think it's even a tough question of how do you even make it relevant to people? Because some people seem to be like completely invested in not doing anything about it. And they either make the argument that it's not happening, or it's questionable that it's happening, or that it's already too bad, we're definitely going to die. So why do anything?
And it's denial or nihilism.
Yeah.
That's a really That's a dangerous place, you know. I think, you know, I guess last question. You hear a lot, I mean, I hear for this from my family and some other people about, you know, it's all bad news. It's all what sucks and what's going bad and who got killed, and, you know, every night on local news, almost everywhere. It's like this burglary at whatever place, you know, and that whole it bleeds, it leads thing has, I think it's pretty obvious, and social media bombards people with this, right? You have in one sense, you have these idyllic lives that nobody's actually living, that you feel bad for not living yourself, and then you were bombarded by all this negative news. And so, you know, is it sort of stupid and cheeky of me to kind of say we need some, you know, fucking good news stories, or do you take the opinion that, hey, we gotta talk about the stuff that sucks, and if it's a lot of stuff that sucks, that's what we're gonna talk about?
I think that there's a movement. Well, I know that there is a movement right now called the solutions journalism. For something called solutions journalism, because I think that it is important to talk about tragedy on the news, because that's very important to people. Like, you don't know who your audience knows, you don't know what they know, you don't know where they're from. So you've kind of just got to assume, like, if there's because these people want loyal customers, the people who write the nightly news and stuff. And so, you know, if there's a shooting in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, like happened a few years ago, and I live in Washington, D.C., and I watch the news, and you don't show that story that's about my hometown, I'm watching the local news, but I might think, hey, why aren't you guys like, this is important, this is terrorism, this is like a white guy killing two people, and, you know, I might stop watching, and they have to kind of assume that anybody's watching. But I think that it's cynical the way they do it, and I mean, also they're just trying to waste time. But I think there's another level where solutions journalism is cool, because you can cover really depressing stories, but you cover the mass shooting by talking about people who are doing real work to, you know, to end gun violence, or to improve communities so that there is less gun violence. You can report about, you know, climate change refugees, and then talk about, you know, what does it mean to look after a climate refugee, and, you know, maybe educate your audience in a way that might make them realize that climate change is personal to them, or that might make them realize that, like, gun violence in their neighborhood or in the neighborhood 3 down is personal to them. So I would say as an answer that, like, we should definitely be talking about happy things, especially in the opinion side of things. And, like, yeah, the news can cover, like, happy events. You know, the old newspapers would cover marriages and, like, you know, obituaries and everything too. But also it's really, tragedy is important, because that you can probably be overwhelmed with it, and there are probably tragedies that are important in the fact that they're a tragedy for people, but don't mean a trend or anything. And then maybe if you put too much coverage on that, then people will, for instance, immigrants killing people. You know, they love to push those stories when they come about, because they validate the Trump world view, and people will watch them for it. Liberals will watch them to yell at them, and you know, the Trumpites will watch them to say, I told you, I was right. And then
the ratings go right up.
But then they don't cover the fact that, like, more cops are killed by white people than black people every year, and that, like, cops are killing more black people, and that, like, violence against cops is down. And these are all very important facts which aren't really well known in this country right now, unless you're working on those issues. And then you're like, you know, you're one in a million, basically.
And you have to do it for your job or something like that. All right, man. Well, tell us. I want to promote what you're doing. So tell people where they can find you on that terrible social media that we've been talking about. But also just where you can find what you're doing and anybody that you want to, like you said, give a shout out to or direct people towards.
Yeah. So I did a lot of amateur journalism for about a year and a half. And I'm currently taking a bit of a break, but my name is Reece Baker, and that's RHYSBAKER. And you can find my journalism page where I have a lot of videos that I've done. I'm totally open to people having conversations with me about how they could actually get into journalism. You could get a lot further than I ever got. But like, I would be able to push you to other things I've made from there. I definitely push you to check out my friend Eleanor Goldfield. She does great work. And she is, she could do with some more people on her Patreon. Also, my friend Kevin could definitely, yeah. I mean, if you wanted, I tried to create a Patreon once, and I didn't really feel like pushing it. I hate asking for money.
I understand that. Yeah, I do have 2 patrons on my, so shout out to you guys. You know who you are. I've contacted both of them. So it's cool. I mean, I'm not specifically doing it for money, but it is really important. I mean, this is not something that is always easy and does take time, and real good investigative journalism or on the ground journalism is way harder than me, talking about stuff that I find interesting. I'm doing opinion stuff. You're doing journalism and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I think the Patreon is interesting because it is changing the game a little bit, and there are people like Jordan Peterson who are making a killing on Patreon, which I don't feel great about. But
and Chapo Trap House,
right,
who are very interesting content.
Yeah, exactly. So and I think the subscription model or the kind of pay as you want model, that's a good thing. I'm not sure how sustainable it will be in the long run, especially for more independent stuff like this and other things, but it's at least an option. And I'm at the point of saying, at the end of the episode, check us out on social media, and if you want to drop a few bucks in the Patreon, go ahead. But yeah, what I would just say is I've enjoyed, and I've read almost everything that I've seen you write recently, and I will tell everybody who's listening that should check out what you have written.
So that would be the Barricades.
The Barricades.
Yeah, so I have a blog called the Barricades, where I wrote short pieces about revolutionary topics, and not just actual revolutions, but also just cool social developments and social organizing and everything. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's a good little library. I'm thinking of turning that into something different as well. And, and another group is Status Coup. Is a journalist group that is trying to get off the ground right now. And that's Jordan Chariton, who used to be with the Young Turks. And they're going to be doing some great coverage of what Jordan likes to call Bernie's America. And so he really goes into these communities across the country of people who are suffering since the great collapse of 2008, which people love to say is over.
Yeah, right.
But I appreciate the compliment, and I plan on producing more. And yeah, I appreciate you inviting me on. This was a great conversation.
Absolutely, at any time. And yeah, everybody check out the Barricades, and I'll have a link to everything that you mentioned. So like Eleanor and everything like that. I'll make sure that there are links in it, and that way it'll be easy for everybody to check out. So yeah, all right, man. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening, and definitely consider covering your local politics. That's a great place to begin with journalism, is just city council meetings.
Yeah.
And just share it with your community. Blogs work.
You'd be surprised, especially people who do find themselves in maybe smaller communities or communities they don't think matter, that you'd be surprised how much is going on in those city council meetings and how much of an influence you can have on your community by just making comments about it or just telling people what they think that you think they should know. And you're in an area where you can spread information that's not just pictures of pretty people on Instagram. You can send people good journalism. So
you can get the speed limit increased on like your local road or something. You can get an extra
really
stop sign somewhere. Yeah. You can really change the lives of a bunch of people who live near you.
Absolutely. Get into journalism. Don't be lame.
Yeah, and don't expect to get too much money out of it.
Yeah, do it for the love.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you.
All right, man. Thanks.